welcome. The BoreCore archive is a collection of slow, methodical recordings of technical processes and perfectly boring routines designed to help you relax and fall asleep. New procedures are added regularly, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Time to relax, close your eyes, and take it on down to Sleepy Town.
Welcome to a complete operational guide to the receiving, inventory management, PAR level replenishment, exchange cart system, requisition fulfillment, and supply distribution of a hospital materials management department on a standard day shift, or the reason the nurse had gloves when she needed them, which she did not think about because she did not have to. You are a materials management technician at a 500-bed acute care hospital. Your department is called materials management, though it is also called supply chain, central supply, or stores, depending on the hospital and the decade. The name has changed over the years. The work has not changed substantially. You receive supplies, you store them, you track them, and you deliver them to the clinical areas that need them. You do this continuously, every day of the year, on a rotating schedule of day, evening, and overnight shifts. Because a hospital does not pause its supply consumption when the sun goes down. Neither do you. Your department occupies approximately 8,000 square feet of space in the basement level of the hospital, a location that is almost universal in hospital design. Because the basement is the optimal place for a function that requires large receiving doors for delivery trucks, a large storage footprint, and a distribution network that can move supplies upward to every floor of the building without consuming the patient care corridors. The basement has none of the natural light of the clinical floors above it, which is a condition you accepted when you took the job and have since stopped noticing. The fluorescent lighting in the materials management department is consistent and adequate. There is a great deal of shelving. The shelving is organized. The department manages approximately 14,000 unique supply items, called stock keeping units, or SKUs, ranging from a single latex-free examination glove to a complex surgical instrument kit, to a package of copy paper for the nursing station printer, simultaneously. Many are managed through a just-in-time model ordered from vendors on short lead times and delivered directly to the clinical areas that use them, while others are stocked in the central warehouse in sufficient quantities to buffer against supply disruptions. The distinction between stocked and non-stocked items is a deliberate supply chain decision based on usage frequency, criticality, shelf life, and storage space, and it is revisited annually as part of the department's inventory management cycle. Your shift begins at 6 in the morning. It ends at 2:30 in the afternoon. The overnight shift has already completed the exchange cart rotation, which is the nightly distribution of supplies to the nursing units. The receiving dock opens at 7. The first delivery trucks arrive at 7:15. The clinical floors begin their morning procedures at approximately 7:30, and will generate their first urgent supply requests by 8. You have approximately 1 hour to prepare. Let us begin. You arrive at 6 and badge in through the staff entrance adjacent to the receiving dock. The receiving dock is closed and locked at this hour. Deliveries do not begin until 7. The dock area is clean and clear from the overnight shift's preparation. The incoming delivery staging area has been swept, and the outbound return pallet area has been organized. You note this. A clear receiving dock is a receiving dock that can process incoming deliveries efficiently. A cluttered one cannot. You proceed to the Materials Management Office, a glassed-in space at the northeast corner of the department, from which the entire warehouse floor is visible. The overnight shift supervisor is completing the shift summary at the computer terminal. You receive the overnight briefing. The overnight briefing covers 5 categories. First, any supply shortages or stockouts that developed during the overnight period. Items that were requisitioned by clinical units and could not be filled from available stock. There are 2 this morning. A specific size of nasogastric tube, the 14 French, is at 0 units in stock, following an unexpectedly high draw from the medical surgical units during the night. The overnight team has already placed an emergency order with the vendor and has noted the item as a priority receiving task for this morning. The second shortage is a particular brand of wound care dressing that has been on extended national backorder for 3 weeks. The department has been substituting an approved equivalent, but the clinical staff have been inconsistent in accepting the substitution. And there is a note in the briefing log to follow up with the wound care coordinator this morning. Second, any receiving discrepancies from the previous day's deliveries. Shipments that arrived damaged, short, or with items that do not match the purchase order. 1 discrepancy. A box of surgical prep kits arrived yesterday afternoon with a quantity of 24 units rather than the 48 on the purchase order. The vendor has been notified and a correction shipment is expected today. The purchase order has been annotated accordingly. Third, any equipment issues in the department. Carts with malfunctioning wheels, scanners with low batteries, the conveyor system status. All equipment is functional. The label printer in the receiving area required a paper roll change during the overnight shift, which has been done. Fourth, any special deliveries or scheduled events for today's shift. A scheduled vendor visit from the surgical supply representative at 10 in the morning to review the orthopedic implant consignment inventory, and a scheduled linen delivery at 8 that will require the receiving dock to be clear of other activity during that window, because the linen company's truck requires the full dock width to maneuver. Fifth, any communications from clinical departments received overnight. 1 request from the neurology unit for a supply of a specific brand of electrode gel is not currently in the formulary to be routed to the Value Analysis Committee for evaluation. And one note from the operating room supervisor requesting an increase in the par level for a specific suture product that has been running low before the weekly replenishment cycle. You sign the shift handoff log, acknowledging receipt of the briefing. The overnight supervisor leaves. You pour a cup of coffee from the machine in the break area adjacent to the office and review today's receiving schedule on the terminal. Before the day's operational activity begins, it is useful to understand the information infrastructure that governs everything the department does. The hospital's materials management operates on an enterprise resource planning system, a large integrated software platform that manages purchasing, inventory, receiving, distribution, and financial accounting for all supply chain activity across the entire hospital system. Your hospital is part of a regional health system with 7 facilities, and the ERP system is shared across all 7, which means that purchasing contracts, vendor relationships, and supply formulary decisions are made at the system level and administered locally at each facility by the materials management team. Within the ERP system, each supply item has a master item record that contains the item's name and description, its manufacturer and catalog, number the contracted vendor, and contract pricing the unit of measure in which it is purchased and the unit of measure in which it is issued, the current on-hand quantity at this facility, the par level, the reorder point, the economic order quantity, the storage location in the warehouse, and the list of clinical departments that use the item. The par level is the quantity that should be on hand at any given time to support normal usage without running out, and it represents a balance between carrying enough stock to prevent shortages and carrying so much stock that the department is tying up excessive capital and storage space in inventory. Setting and maintaining par levels correctly is one of the core competencies of materials management. Par level management is not set and forget. Par levels are established based on historical usage data, typically a rolling average of the past 6 to 12 months of consumption, adjusted for known seasonal variation, planned clinical program changes, and supply chain reliability. An item with a highly variable usage pattern or an unreliable vendor lead time requires a higher par level to buffer against uncertainty. An item with consistent, predictable usage from a vendor with reliable 2-day lead times can be managed at a lower par level. A new clinical program, such as the addition of a cardiac catheterization lab or a robotic surgery program, will create demand for supplies that did not previously appear in the historical data. And the par levels for those items must be established from scratch, using clinical projections rather than usage history. The reorder point is the on-hand quantity at which a replenishment order is automatically triggered. When the system records a transaction that brings the on-hand quantity of an item below the reorder point. It generates a purchase requisition that is reviewed by the buyer and converted to a purchase order. Your hospital uses an automated reorder process for most stocked items with manual review by the buyer before order release to catch anomalies. An automated order for an unusually large quantity, for example, might indicate a data entry error in the consumption record rather than a genuine surge in demand. And catching this before the order is released saves the cost and effort of receiving and then returning an incorrect shipment. You check the morning exception report on the ERP terminal. The exception report is a generated list of items that are below their reorder points this morning. Items whose on-hand quantity has dropped to a level requiring replenishment. This morning's exception report shows 47 items. You review the list. 32 of the 47 are routine replenishment items where the reorder was triggered by normal consumption, and the suggested order quantities are appropriate. You approve these for release to the buyer. The remaining 15 require review. 5 are items where the reorder was triggered by a large single transaction, possibly a department requisition for a project or a special procedure. And the normal reorder quantity would generate more stock than is needed. 3 are items where the on-hand quantity entered in the system appears to be inconsistent with a recent physical count, suggesting a data discrepancy requiring investigation. And 7 are items where the contracted vendor has a current lead time longer than normal due to supply chain conditions, requiring either a larger order quantity to bridge the longer lead time or identification of an alternative source. You flag these 15 items for follow-up and send the exception report notes to the buyer, who will begin their morning with the purchase order review at 7:30. You then check the backorder report, which lists items currently on order from vendors that have not yet been delivered. The 14 French nasogastric tube from the overnight shortage is now on this report, with an estimated delivery of today per the emergency order placed by the overnight team. You note the expected delivery and flag the receiving queue to prioritize this item when the shipment arrives. At 7 o'clock, you unlock the receiving dock and bring the dock to operational status. Bringing the dock to operational status involves turning on the dock lights, activating the dock leveler, which is the hinged steel plate that bridges the gap between the dock floor and the bed of a delivery truck, and allows pallet jacks and hand trucks to move smoothly between the two, confirming the availability of the pallet jack and hand truck equipment in the dock staging area, and activating the receiving computer terminal and scanner on the dock counter. The dock leveler deserves a brief description because it is a piece of infrastructure whose operation most people who have never worked on a receiving dock have no reason to think about. When a delivery truck backs up to the dock, the truck bed is at approximately the same height as the dock floor, but the alignment is imperfect. There is a gap between the dock edge and the truck bumper that ranges from a few inches to over a foot, and the truck bed may be slightly higher or lower than the dock floor, depending on how the load has settled the truck's suspension. The dock leveler, a steel plate on a hydraulic or mechanical hinge, raises to bridge this gap when the dock door opens, resting its far edge on the truck bed and creating a continuous ramp surface between the dock and the truck. A pallet jack loaded with a heavy pallet can then be driven smoothly from the truck to the dock without any awkward step up or drop down. The dock leveler is not a complicated device. It is a device whose absence would make receiving operations considerably more cumbersome. The first delivery truck arrives at 7:14. It is the hospital's primary medical surgical supply distributor, a national distributor that handles the majority of commodity supply items: gloves, gowns, drapes, syringes, tubing, catheters, wound care products, and hundreds of other items consumed daily throughout the hospital. The truck carries items for your hospital and for 2 other facilities in the health system. Your portion of the truck's load consists of 14 pallets. The driver backs the truck to the dock, and the dock leveler is engaged. You and the receiving technician who arrived at 6:30 begin unloading the pallets using the electric pallet jack. Each pallet is moved from the truck to the dock staging area and positioned in sequence for receiving processing. The pallets are labeled with a packing slip identifier and a manifest. You count the pallets, 14, which matches the manifest. Receiving processing is the verification that what was delivered matches what was ordered. For each pallet, you scan the barcode on the packing slip, which pulls up the associated purchase order in the receiving terminal. You then verify the contents of the pallet against the purchase order line items. Each box is scanned or manually keyed, the quantity is confirmed, and the condition is assessed. Condition assessment means looking for boxes that are crushed, wet, open, or otherwise showing signs of damage in transit. A box that arrives crushed may contain damaged items that must be inspected before being placed in stock. A box that has been wet may contain sterile items whose packaging integrity has been compromised, rendering them unsuitable for clinical use. On this morning's delivery, you find 2 damaged boxes on pallet 7. Both are cases of examination gloves, medium size, nitrile. The boxes are crushed at one corner, with visible compression damage to the inner packaging. You photograph the damage with the receiving tablet camera and set the boxes aside for closer inspection. When you open them, the individual glove boxes inside are intact and undamaged, suggesting the outer case absorbed the damage without transferring it to the contents. You document the finding in the receiving record. Note that the individual boxes appear undamaged. place them in stock while flagging the lot number for monitoring. If any clinical staff report problems with gloves from this lot, the receiving record will allow rapid identification and removal of the affected stock. You also receive the emergency shipment of 14 French nasogastric tubes on this delivery, which the overnight team had expedited. You confirm the quantity, 24 units, which matches the emergency order. You process this item first before completing the rest of the receiving and immediately walk the stock to the warehouse location and update the on-hand quantity in the system. Clinical units can now place requisitions for this item. You send a brief notification to the medical surgical nursing coordinator. 14 French NG tubes are back in stock as of this morning. The receiving process for the 14 pallets takes approximately 90 minutes when conducted systematically. Scanning, verifying, noting discrepancies, organizing by warehouse location for put away. You and the receiving technician work through the pallets in parallel. You at the receiving terminal and they scanning and counting. The packing slip correction for the surgical prep kit shortage from yesterday is not in this delivery. The correction shipment from that vendor is scheduled for a different truck later in the morning. After receiving processing is complete, the verified items must be moved from the staging area to their designated warehouse storage locations. This process is called put away, and it is more consequential than it appears. The warehouse is organized according to a location system that assigns each stock item a specific shelf, bay, and bin position, identified by a 3-part alphanumeric code. The location code is recorded in the item's master record in the ERP system, and it is the address that tells every member of the department where a specific item belongs. A warehouse where items are stored in consistent, known locations is a warehouse where picking is fast, accurate, and teachable. A warehouse where items drift to wherever there happened to be space at the time of the last delivery is a warehouse where picking requires searching. Searching causes delays. Delays reach the clinical floors. And clinical floors call the materials management office to ask where their supplies are. Your warehouse uses a modified ABC slotting strategy in which items are classified by usage velocity and positioned in the warehouse accordingly. Class A items are the highest velocity items, consumed in the largest quantities on the most consistent daily basis. Examination gloves, syringes, IV tubing, alcohol prep pads, and similar commodity items. Class A items are positioned at the front of the warehouse, nearest the elevator and distribution staging area, in ergonomically optimal locations between knee height and shoulder height in the most accessible bays, so that picking and replenishment are as physically efficient as possible. A picker who has to walk to the back of the warehouse and reach to the top shelf for a high-velocity item is a picker who is spending more time per pick than necessary. And time per pick multiplied across hundreds of daily transactions, accumulates into significant inefficiency. Class B items are moderate velocity items, used regularly, but not in the volumes of Class A. They occupy the middle sections of the warehouse. Class C items are low velocity items, used infrequently and in small quantities. Specialty items for specific procedures. Backup stock for items primarily managed through direct-to-unit delivery. And emergency reserve items. Class C items are in the rear of the warehouse and on the higher and lower shelves. You and the receiving technician work through the put-away of this morning's delivery. Using the put-away list generated by the receiving system that organizes the received items in warehouse location sequence, minimizing the travel distance through the warehouse. You load a 4-wheeled stock cart with the items for the first warehouse zone and walk the cart to its starting position, working through the bins systematically. Pull the existing stock forward to the front of the bin. Place the new stock behind it. Confirm the bin label matches the item. Confirm the quantity on hand in the system matches the physical count after adding the new stock. The confirmation step is where put-away errors most commonly occur. And errors at put-away create inventory inaccuracies that propagate throughout the supply chain. If a case of medium nitrile gloves is placed in the bin designated for large nitrile gloves, because the large bin happened to have more space, the system shows the medium gloves at their correct location and at the correct quantity, but the physical product is in the wrong location. A picker pulling medium gloves based on the system location will find large gloves instead, either picking the wrong size or taking the time to search for the correct location, neither of which is acceptable in a clinical supply environment. You place each item in the correct bin. You check the bin label before placing the item. This is not a complicated procedure. It is a procedure that must be done correctly every time, which is the description of most important procedures. During put-away, you conduct a rotation check at each bin. First in, first out, FIFO. Rotation means placing new stock behind existing stock, so that the items that have been in the bin the longest are picked first. FIFO rotation is critical for items with expiration dates. If new stock is placed in front of existing stock, the existing stock will continue to age at the back of the bin, while the newer stock is consumed, and eventually the back stock will expire before it is used. An expired item that reaches a clinical floor is a supply failure. The consequences of an expired sterile item reaching a clinical area are clinical and regulatory, not merely operational. You rotate every bin. This takes additional time compared to simply placing new items in the front of the bin. The time is well spent. While the receiving and put-away work continues, the exchange cart technicians have begun the morning PAR level replenishment runs to the nursing units. The PAR level replenishment system also called the exchange cart system or the supply distribution system, depending on the institution, is the mechanism by which supplies are routinely delivered from the central warehouse to the clinical areas on a scheduled cycle. Understanding this system requires understanding what a par-level supply environment looks like from the clinical floor's perspective. Each nursing unit in the hospital has one or more supply rooms or supply closets stocked with the items that unit uses regularly. The supply room stocks are maintained at defined par levels. Predetermined quantities of each item that represent the amount the unit needs between replenishment cycles. The replenishment cycle at your hospital is 24 hours. Every unit's supply room is replenished once per day, typically overnight, bringing each item back to its par level from whatever quantity remains after the previous day's consumption. A unit that consumes all of its par quantity of a specific item in less than 24 hours can requisition additional stock through an urgent or stat request. A unit that consistently consumes less than its par level has par levels that are set too high and are wasting storage space and tying up inventory unnecessarily. The exchange cart system uses a physical cart management approach. Each unit has 2 carts of supplies, one active and one in process. During the overnight replenishment run, the materials management technician takes the unit's depleted cart back to the central warehouse, replaces it with a pre-stocked cart that was prepared during the previous day, and the depleted cart is then restocked in the warehouse during the day shift for the following night's exchange. At any given time, the unit has one fully stocked cart on the floor, and the department has one cart being restocked in the warehouse. This system ensures continuous supply availability on the unit. There is never a period where the unit's supplies are depleted and awaiting delivery. The restocking of the exchange carts in the warehouse is one of the primary day shift tasks. You have 3 cart technicians working this morning, restocking the carts returned during the overnight run. The restocking process is methodical. Each cart has a pick list associated with the unit it serves, specifying the item, the bin location, and the par quantity for each slot on the cart. The technician works through the pick list, bin by bin, pulling the specified quantity of each item from its warehouse location and placing it in the designated cart slot. Each pick is confirmed by scanning the item barcode, which records the transaction in the ERP system and deducts the picked quantity from the warehouse on-hand balance. Scan confirmation during picking is a technology investment whose return is measured in accuracy before the implementation of barcode scanning. Pick accuracy in materials management departments was typically in the range of 97 to 98%, meaning 2 to 3 picks per 100 resulted in the wrong item, wrong quantity, or wrong location. In a department processing several hundred picks per day, a 2% error rate translates to several errors per day reaching clinical floors. With scan confirmation, pick accuracy typically improves to above 99.5%, meaning fewer than one error per 200 picks. The remaining errors are typically the result of items that share very similar packaging or are stored adjacent to each other in the warehouse, where visual similarity causes occasional misidentification that the scan catches if the barcodes are distinct, but misses if the barcodes are the same between very similar products. The scan does not eliminate human error. It makes it much less frequent. You walk through the cart restocking area and observe the 3 technicians at work. Cart 12, which serves the oncology unit, is nearly complete. The oncology unit has specific supply requirements reflecting the nature of its patient population. Chemotherapy administration supplies, specialized personal protective equipment for handling cytotoxic agents, and a higher proportion of comfort and wound care items than a general medical unit. The cart for oncology is larger than the carts for some other units, and its pick list is longer. You verify that the correct cytotoxic handling kit is included in the correct quantity and correctly placed in the designated cart slot. You confirm it. Cart 12 is complete. You note the completion time in the cart management log. At 9:15, the linen delivery truck arrives, approximately 45 minutes early. The briefing this morning noted that the linen delivery was scheduled for 8 and would require the full dock width. The early arrival is not a problem in itself, but the receiving dock is currently occupied by the second delivery truck of the morning, a pharmaceutical and medical gas supply truck that arrived at 9 and is still partially unloaded. You redirect the linen truck to the secondary dock on the west side of the building, which is used for this exact situation. A second simultaneous delivery that cannot share the main dock. The linen driver is familiar with the secondary dock and backs in without difficulty. Linen delivery is managed differently from medical supply delivery. The hospital's linen is managed under a rental and processing contract with a commercial laundry. The laundry picks up soiled linen from the hospital on a daily basis, cleans and packages it, and returns it on the same daily cycle. The materials management department receives the clean linen, verifies the delivery, and routes it to the linen storage area adjacent to the elevator core for distribution to the floor linen rooms throughout the hospital. The linen delivery consists of carts, specifically wireframe laundry carts on wheels, each covered with a clear plastic bag containing assorted packaged linen item type. Patient gowns, bed sheets, pillowcases, bath towels, washcloths, bath blankets, and surgical drapes and towels processed in a separate hygienic packaging. The carts are counted and matched against the delivery manifest. The manifest shows 42 carts for this delivery. You count 42 carts. You verify the manifest's linen item counts against the cart labels. Each cart is labeled with its item type and quantity. You note any discrepancies and sign the delivery confirmation. The linen distribution to floor linen rooms is handled by a separate housekeeping and linen department, but the receipt and initial storage of the linen is materials management's responsibility. The linen carts are moved from the secondary dock to the linen staging area using the service corridor. The service corridor is the institutional use corridor that runs parallel to the main hospital corridor on each floor, separated from patient and visitor areas, wide enough for supply carts and linen carts to pass in both directions without obstruction. It is the circulation system of the hospital's supply infrastructure, invisible to patients and visitors, and essential to operations. You have navigated it many thousands of times. The linen staging area is organized by item type with a dedicated section for each category. You oversee the organization of the incoming linen carts into the correct sections. Gowns here, sheets here, towels here. Organized staging means the housekeeping team can access what they need efficiently during the linen distribution runs throughout the day. Disorganized staging means their staff spend time searching for items in the staging area, which is time not spent distributing linen to the floors, which eventually results in a nursing unit calling to report a shortage of washcloths. You organize the staging. At 10 o'clock, the orthopedic implant vendor representative arrives for the scheduled consignment inventory review. Consignment inventory is a supply arrangement in which the vendor maintains a physical stock of high-value items, typically surgical implants, in a locked storage area within the hospital. And the hospital is billed only when the items are actually used in a procedure. The implants remain the vendor's property until they are opened in the operating room, at which point ownership transfers to the hospital and the charge is recorded. This arrangement benefits the hospital by reducing the capital tied up in implant inventory, and it benefits the vendor by ensuring their products are physically present and available when the surgeon selects them. Managing consignment inventory is one of the more documentation-intensive aspects of hospital supply chain management. Every item in the consignment area must be accounted for, received, tracked by lot number and expiration date, documented when used, and verified during periodic physical counts. The count must agree with the vendor's records. If the physical count shows fewer items than the vendor's records indicate should be on hand, the discrepancy must be investigated. Items may have been used and not yet charged, may have been moved to another storage location, may have been returned to the vendor without proper documentation, or in rare cases may be genuinely unaccounted for. The orthopedic implant consignment area is a locked cage in the surgical supply section of the department, approximately 12 feet by 16 feet, with floor-to-ceiling shelving on 3 walls and a central work surface. The cage contains total hip and total knee replacement systems from 2 manufacturers, a spinal fixation system, and a trauma implant system. The total replacement value of the implants in this cage is approximately $400,000, which is not unusual for a hospital of this size with an active orthopedic surgery program. You meet the vendor representative at the cage. The representative is a professional who is familiar with hospital supply chain environments and understands the process. You unlock the cage and the representative begins the count, working through each shelf systematically, recording each item's catalog number, lot number, expiration date, and quantity. You have your own count sheet and count simultaneously. At the conclusion of the count, you compare your totals against the representative's totals and against the vendor's master consignment record. Any discrepancies between your count and the vendor's record require reconciliation. This morning's count shows one discrepancy: a titanium femoral stem implant in a specific size, listed in the vendor's record as 2 units on hand, is present as 1 unit on your physical count. You investigate while the representative waits. You pull the usage records in the ERP system for this item for the past 30 days. The usage record shows this item was used in a procedure 11 days ago, but the charge was entered for the wrong size variant, posting the usage to a similar but different catalog number. The actual item used is still showing as on hand in the system because the charge was applied to the wrong record. You identify the correct procedure note, confirm with the operating room records, and process a correction charge. The discrepancy is resolved. The vendor's record and your physical count now agree. You note the correction in the consignment management log and flag the item data entry for follow-up training with the OR charge entry staff. The consignment visit concludes at 11:15. The representative signs the count verification form, and you retain a copy for your records. The cage is relocked. The records are updated. $400,000 of implants are accounted for to the unit level. This is what consignment management looks like when it is done correctly: meticulous, time-consuming, and entirely uneventful. Throughout the morning, clinical departments have been submitting supply requisitions through the hospital's electronic requisition system. A requisition is a formal request from a department for supplies not covered by the routine par level replenishment, or for quantities exceeding what the par system provides, or for items that are not in the standard par list for that unit. Requisitions are a normal and continuous aspect of hospital supply activity, and fulfilling them accurately and promptly is one of the most visible measures of the materials management department's service quality from the clinical staff's perspective. You review the requisition queue on the terminal. This morning's pending requisitions, number 23, ranging from a routine request for additional gauge pads from the wound care clinic to a specialized request for a specific type of arterial line kit from the intensive care unit. Requisitions are triaged by urgency. Routine requisitions are fulfilled within the same business day, urgent requisitions within 2 hours, and stat requisitions within 30 minutes. A stat requisition indicates a patient care need that cannot wait for routine fulfillment. In a hospital supply chain, a stat request is the equivalent of an emergency override on the normal scheduling system. There is one stat requisition in the queue this morning, a request from the emergency department for 12 units of activated charcoal, a medication used in certain poisoning cases. Activated charcoal is technically a pharmaceutical item and is primarily managed by the pharmacy, but your department maintains a small emergency stock of selected critical medications and supplies in a dedicated rapid access cabinet as a backup for situations where the pharmacy is processing a high volume of orders and cannot fill a request within the stat timeframe. You pull 12 units of activated charcoal from the emergency backup cabinet, package them in a labeled bag with the requisition number and the requesting department, and call the emergency department to confirm they are sending someone to pick them up or whether you should courier it up. They send a runner. The runner arrives in 4 minutes. You hand off the package, confirm the requisition in the system, and note the stat fulfillment time. 11 minutes from submission to handoff. You note this in the stat fulfillment log, which is reviewed monthly as part of the department's performance metrics. The remaining 22 requisitions are fulfilled by the 2 requisition technicians working the morning fulfillment assignment. The fulfillment process is similar to cart restocking. Each requisition generates a pick list. The technician pulls items from the warehouse, scans each item to confirm the pick, and assembles the order for delivery or pickup. Requisitions for items that are not in the warehouse stock must be sourced through a different pathway. Either a direct issue from a vendor delivery that is already in the receiving queue, a transfer from another facility in the health system, or an emergency purchase from a local supplier if the need is urgent and the normal supply chain cannot respond quickly enough. One of this morning's routine requisitions is from the pediatric unit, requesting 6 units of a specific size of pediatric nasogastric tube. The system shows this item in stock at the correct location. The technician pulls the item from the bin, scans it, and notes that the quantity in the bin does not match the system record. The system shows 12 units on hand, but the physical bin contains only 4. This is a count discrepancy, and it should be investigated before the technician fulfills the requisition. You examine the bin. There are 4 units of the correct item. The adjacent bin holds a slightly different size of the same type of tube, and that bin has 8 units in it. The most probable explanation for the discrepancy is that 8 units were placed in the wrong bin during a previous put away, either by inverting 2 similar-looking items or by a distraction during the put away process. You verify the adjacent bin's item. It is indeed the wrong size for that bin location. You move the 8 units to the correct bins, updating the inventory counts in the system for both items. The pediatric unit's requisition for 6 units of the smaller size can now be fulfilled from the now correct stock of 12 units in the correct bin. You note the count adjustment in the inventory discrepancy log. This will be reviewed as part of the month-end inventory accuracy analysis. The operating room is the most supply-intensive clinical area in the hospital, and the one with the most demanding supply chain requirements. A surgical case requires that specific supplies be available in specific quantities, in specific locations, before the case begins, and a missing supply item discovered after the sterile field has been established is a problem of a different order of magnitude than a missing supply item in a nursing unit supply room. The supply chain relationship between materials management and the operating room is therefore closer, more detailed, and more time-sensitive than the relationship with any other clinical department. Your hospital's OR uses a case cart system for surgical supply management. For each scheduled surgical case, a case cart is prepared in advance by materials management technicians working from a procedure-specific supply list called the preference card. The preference card, which we discussed in the operating room preparation script in this series, specifies every supply item needed for that procedure by that surgeon. The instruments, the single-use supplies, the sutures, the drapes, the positioning aids, and any special items requested by the surgeon. The case cart technician pulls each item from its warehouse location, places it on the labeled cart, and delivers the completed cart to the OR suite before the case's scheduled start time. Case cart preparation is a high-accuracy task. An item picked incorrectly, in the wrong size or the wrong quantity, may not be discovered until the surgeon asks for it during the procedure. At that point, the circulating nurse must either find a substitute from the OR's own stockroom, requisition the correct item from materials management as a stat request, or improvise, all of which introduce delay and stress into the surgical environment. Your department's performance target for case cart accuracy is 99% or better, which means no more than 1 error per 100 items picked. Achieving this requires accurate preference cards, correct warehouse locations, and careful pick scanning. This morning, the OR supervisor has flagged a concern from yesterday's afternoon cases. 3 consecutive cases for the same surgeon had a specific brand of electrosurgical pencil missing from their case cards. The preference card for this surgeon correctly lists the item, and the item is in the warehouse stock at the correct location. You investigate. You pull the PIC records for those 3 cases. All 3 show the electrosurgical pencil as scanned and confirmed during case cart preparation. The items were picked. They were scanned. Where are they? You examine the case carts from yesterday's cases, which have been returned to the Materials Management Department after the procedures. The case carts are returned after each case for cleaning, restocking, and preparation for the next use. On one of the 3 returned carts, in a sealed bag with unused single-use supplies from the case, you find 3 electrosurgical pencils. They were on the cart. They were apparently not identified by the OR team during the case setup, possibly because they were placed in the bag rather than on the visible surface of the cart, possibly because a new team member did not recognize the item's position on the cart. The supply chain did not fail here. The communication between the case cart layout and the clinical team's expectations created a locating problem. You note this in the OR supply liaison communication log and schedule a brief meeting with the OR supply coordinator to review the case cart layout standard for this item to ensure consistent placement in a visible location. The item itself will be placed on future carts in the designated top of cart position rather than in the supply bag. The interaction with the OR is also where the par level increase request from the overnight briefing is addressed. The OR supervisor had requested an increase in the par level for a specific suture product, a 0 PDS suture used in abdominal closures that has been running low before the weekly replenishment. You pull the usage data for this item over the past 12 weeks. Average weekly consumption has been 420 units, with a high week of 580 units and a low week of 290. The current par level is 300 units, which is clearly insufficient for average consumption, let alone peak weeks. You calculate a revised par level. Average weekly consumption plus 2 standard deviations of the weekly usage range multiplied by the replenishment cycle factor. The revised par level is 560 units. You update the item master record in the ERP system and note the change with the date, the rationale, and your authorization. The OR supervisor is notified of the change. Inventory accuracy is the foundation of everything the Materials Management Department does, in the sense that every transaction, every replenishment order, every fulfillment decision, and every par level calculation is only as reliable as the accuracy of the on-hand quantity recorded in the system. An inventory system that does not accurately reflect the physical stock in the warehouse is a system that will generate incorrect replenishment orders fail to flag genuine stockouts and present a misleading picture of the department's true supply position. Maintaining inventory accuracy is therefore not a periodic housekeeping task, but a continuous, daily operational discipline. Your hospital uses a cycle counting methodology for inventory accuracy maintenance. A full physical inventory in which every item in the warehouse is counted simultaneously is conducted annually. In between the annual counts, a cycle count program counts a rotating subset of the inventory each day, so that every item in the warehouse is counted at least once per quarter. And high velocity, Class A items are counted monthly. Discrepancies found during cycle counts are investigated and resolved, and the root causes of recurring discrepancies are addressed through process improvement, rather than simply correcting the count and moving on. Today's cycle count assignment covers the GH section of the warehouse, approximately 140 item locations. The cycle count is assigned to the inventory control technician, who works with a printed count sheet generated from the ERP system. The count sheet lists each item location in sequence, the item description, and the system's current on-hand quantity. The technician counts each location without looking at the system quantity on the count sheet. The point of the count is to determine the physical quantity and then compare it to the system quantity, not to verify that the physical quantity matches the expected number. Counting while looking at the expected quantity introduces confirmation bias, the tendency to count until you reach the expected number rather than counting accurately. The count sheet quantities are revealed only after the physical count is complete. The cycle count for today's section finds 3 discrepancies. The first is a minor count difference. The system shows 48 units of a specific catheter, and the physical count shows 44 units, a difference of 4 units in an item with a par level of 60 and daily consumption of approximately 6 units is not an operationally critical discrepancy, but it suggests that 4 transactions involving this item were not properly recorded in the system. You investigate. The transaction history for this item in the past 30 days shows no obvious gaps or anomalies. The discrepancy is likely from a small number of unscanned issues, where a staff member took an item from the bin without scanning it because of a scanner being unavailable or a rush situation. You adjust the on-hand count to match the physical reality and note the discrepancy and the count adjustment in the inventory variance log. The second discrepancy is more significant. The system shows 22 units of a sterile wound irrigation syringe, and the physical count shows 0 units. The bin is empty. You investigate the transaction history for this item. The last receiving transaction shows 22 units received 2 weeks ago. There have been no issues recorded since that receiving transaction. 22 units of a specific item disappearing from inventory without any recorded transactions is an inventory integrity problem. You check the adjacent bin locations to rule out a put-away error. The surrounding items are all correct. You check whether the item may have been requisitioned to a unit without proper scan. There are no relevant requisitions in the pending queue for this item from any unit. You review the clinical floor stocking records to see if this item appears in any unit's exchange cart par list. It appears in 2 units par lists, and the last cart exchange records show it being stocked on those carts correctly. The units have par stock. The warehouse has none. The most probable explanation is that the item was picked for the exchange carts from warehouse stock, but the scan transactions were not recorded, resulting in physical depletion without system depletion. You investigate further by reviewing the scanner log for the days in question. The scanner assigned to the cart restocking station had a battery fault flag on 2 days during this period, which may have caused scan transactions to fail silently, appearing successful to the technician, but not recording in the system. This is a known failure mode for that scanner model in low battery conditions. You correct the inventory to 0 and place a replenishment order. You flag the scanner for battery replacement and add a daily battery check to the scanner maintenance checklist. The root cause is identified and addressed. The count variance is not simply corrected and forgotten. In the early afternoon, you address the neurology unit's request for the off-formulary electrode gel from the overnight briefing. The formulary, in a hospital supply chain context, refers to the approved list of supply items that the hospital has evaluated and contracted for. Adding a new item to the formulary requires a formal evaluation process to ensure the item meets clinical standards, is competitively priced, does not create unnecessary duplication with an existing formulary item, and fits within the department's supply management capabilities. Requests for non-formulary items are routed to the Value Analysis Committee, a multidisciplinary group that includes representatives from materials management, clinical departments, infection control, and finance, and that meets monthly to evaluate new item requests and supply chain changes. You prepare the value analysis request form for the electrode gel. The form requires the requesting department and clinician, the clinical rationale for the specific product, the catalog information, including the manufacturer, the unit price, and the proposed annual usage estimate, the name of any existing formulary item that serves the same or a similar function, and the clinical reason the existing item is not acceptable, and any evidence regarding the product's clinical outcomes or safety record. You contact the neurology unit's requesting physician to gather the clinical rationale. The physician explains that the specific gel has a formulation that reduces impedance at the electrode interface, improving signal quality for a specific type of monitoring used in epilepsy care, and that the currently approved gel has been producing inconsistent readings for this application. This is a clinical differentiation that the Value Analysis Committee will take seriously. You also identify the existing formulary electrode gel and its contract pricing. Pull the neurology unit's usage history for the existing gel to estimate what they would use of the new product, and obtain pricing from the requesting product's manufacturer through the group purchasing organization. The GPO, which is the consortium to which your hospital belongs for contract negotiation. Group purchasing organizations negotiate supply contracts on behalf of multiple member hospitals, achieving pricing that no single hospital could obtain through individual negotiation. The GPO pricing for the requested electrode gel is available and is within the range of the existing formulary item, which simplifies the financial analysis. You complete the value analysis request form and submit it to the committee coordinator for inclusion in next month's meeting agenda. You notify the neurology unit's requesting physician that the request has been submitted and will be reviewed at the next committee meeting, and that, in the interim, the existing formulary gel remains the approved product. You note in your follow-up tracker that this item has a committee review date and should be followed up after the meeting for the committee's decision. The value analysis process is sometimes frustrating for clinical staff who want a specific product available immediately and view the committee review period as bureaucratic delay. From the supply chain perspective, the committee process serves functions that individual clinical judgment cannot fully replace. It prevents duplication of functionally equivalent items that would each require separate storage tracking and contract management. It ensures that pricing is competitive. It protects against vendor influence on clinical purchasing decisions, and it creates a documented record of the clinical rationale for formulary decisions that is available for regulatory audit. A hospital that adds every requested product to its formulary without evaluation will manage thousands of items that have near duplicate substitutes, maintain dozens of contracts for marginally differentiated products, and spend disproportionate time on the administrative complexity of its own supply catalog. The committee process is a constraint with a purpose. The buyer, who has been working at their terminal since 7:30, brings you a summary of the morning's purchase order activity and the issues requiring supervisor review. Your hospital's materials management department employs 2 buyers whose responsibilities are divided by supply category. One buyer manages medical surgical supplies, and the other manages laboratory, pharmacy adjacent, and capital equipment supplies. The 2 buyers process the majority of the hospital's daily purchase volume, working within the contracted vendor relationships and pricing established at the health system level. The morning's purchase order summary shows 74 purchase orders released, with a combined value of approximately $208,000. This is a typical day's purchasing volume for a 500-bed hospital. Most of the orders are routine replenishment orders released through the automated reorder process, reviewed and approved by the buyer based on the exception report you processed this morning. Several require your attention. The first issue is an order for sterile surgical gowns from the primary distributor. The system generated a routine reorder for 12 cases, consistent with the current par level and reorder quantity. However, the buyer flags that the national distributor has communicated a product substitution. The specific gown model on your formulary has been discontinued by the manufacturer, and the distributor is proposing a substitute product from the same manufacturer at the same price. Product substitutions on high-volume clinical items require evaluation before acceptance. The substitute must be clinically equivalent, must meet the same infection control and performance standards, and must be acceptable to the clinical staff who will use it. You pull the specification sheets for both the discontinued and the substitute product and compare them. The substitute has the same reinforcement pattern, the same sterile barrier classification, and the same sizing. You contact the infection control practitioner for a brief review. She confirms the substitute meets the relevant standards. You approve the substitution in the system and update the item master record to reflect the new catalog number. The order for 12 cases of the substitute product is released. The second issue is a pricing discrepancy on an order for isolation gowns. The purchase order was generated at the contracted price of $12.42 per case, but the distributor's acknowledgement shows a price of $13.80 per case, a price discrepancy of $1.38 per case multiplied across a significant annual volume represents a meaningful contract compliance issue. You review the contract. The current contract price is indeed $12.42. The discrepancy may be a system error on the vendor's side, a contract that was not properly loaded into the vendor's pricing system, or an unauthorized price increase. You contact the distributor's account representative by email, flagging the discrepancy and requesting correction to the contract price before the order is invoiced. You put the order on hold pending price correction. You note the discrepancy in the contract compliance log. Price discrepancies that are not caught and corrected accumulate quietly into significant financial losses over time. This one is caught. The third issue is a request from the cardiac catheterization lab for an expedited order of a specific type of balloon catheter that is not in the standard formulary, but is needed for a procedure scheduled for tomorrow morning. The lead time for this item through the primary distributor is 3 to 5 business days, which does not accommodate a tomorrow morning deadline. You identify an alternative source, a regional medical supply company that stocks this item and can provide same-day delivery for an additional courier charge. The per unit price through the alternative source is slightly higher than the primary distributor's price. You contact the cath lab director to confirm the clinical necessity and the timeline. The director confirms the item is needed. You place the order with the regional supplier, document the rationale for the emergency purchase and the price differential in the purchase order notes, and flag the item for the value analysis committee with a recommendation to add it to the formulary, given the apparent regular need. In the early afternoon, you receive a notification from the health system's supply chain office. A major manufacturer of sterile IV bags has announced a temporary production slowdown at their primary manufacturing facility due to an equipment issue, and allocations on several IV bag sizes are being implemented. Allocation means the manufacturer is distributing available production among customers in proportion to their normal purchase volumes, rather than fulfilling orders in full. The allocations affect several sizes of normal saline and dextrose IV bags that are among the highest volume items in your hospital's supply catalog. Supply disruptions of this kind are not rare in hospital supply chain management. The concentrated nature of pharmaceutical and medical supply manufacturing means that a single facility serving multiple manufacturers can affect the supply of products across a wide range of hospitals simultaneously. The COVID-19 pandemic made this dynamic visible to the general public in a way that hospital supply chain professionals had understood for years. Supply chains built for efficiency under normal conditions are vulnerable to disruptions at any point in the chain, and the concentration of production in single facilities or single geographic regions creates systemic risks that are not apparent until they materialize. Your immediate response to the IV bag allocation notification is to assess your current inventory position and projected consumption. You pull the on-hand quantities for the affected sizes from the ERP system and the current daily consumption rates. Normal saline 500 milliliter bags, current on hand of 3,200 units, daily consumption approximately 400 units, giving approximately 8 days of supply. Normal saline 1,000 milliliter bags, on hand 2,800, daily consumption approximately 350, giving 8 days. Dextrose 5% 500 milliliter, on hand 900, daily consumption approximately 120, giving 7.5 days. The allocation notification indicates that your hospital's weekly allocation will be approximately 60% of normal order quantities for the next 3 to 4 weeks. At 60% of normal replenishment, your consumption will exceed your incoming supply by approximately 40% of daily consumption, meaning your inventory will be depleted by approximately 160 units of normal saline 500 milliliter per day, more than it is replenished. At that depletion rate, your current 3,200 unit inventory would be exhausted in approximately 20 days, which falls within the 3 to 4 week disruption window. You convene a brief call with the pharmacy director and the chief nursing officer's office. The 3 of you review the conservation measures available. IV therapy protocols can be reviewed to identify opportunities to switch patients from IV fluid delivery to oral hydration, or clinically appropriate certain IV medications that are compatible can be concentrated to reduce the volume of IV fluid carrier required, and the health system's supply chain office is exploring whether any facilities in the system have excess inventory that can be redistributed to facilities at greater risk of shortage. You agree to implement conservative prescribing guidance for IV fluids immediately and to monitor inventory daily rather than weekly during the disruption period. You update the PAR levels and reorder points for the affected items to reflect the reduced allocation volumes and the increased monitoring frequency. You document all of these decisions and their rationales in the Supply Disruption Management Log, which is the formal record of how the facility managed the event. Supply chain disruption management is one of the less visible but most consequential responsibilities of a materials management department. The daily rhythm of receiving, counting, and distributing is the steady state. The disruption response is the test. A department with accurate inventory data, strong vendor relationships, good communication with clinical leadership, and a practiced playbook for shortage management is a department that can navigate a disruption without a clinical impact. A department that discovers its inventory position only when a shortage reaches the clinical floor, without communication channels to clinical leadership, and without a documented response framework, will have a worse outcome from the same disruption. You have the data, you have the relationships, you have the framework. You use them. In the final hour of the shift, you complete the day's documentation and review the department's performance dashboard. Hospital materials management departments are subject to a range of performance measurement frameworks, from accreditation requirements to health system administrative expectations to internal operational standards, and maintaining accurate records is both a regulatory obligation and the basis for the continuous improvement work that keeps the department functioning at a high level. The daily department log, which you have been updating throughout the shift, contains the shift handoff summary, the receiving log for all deliveries processed today with item counts and noted discrepancies, the requisition log listing all fulfillments with times, and any variances, the stat fulfillment log, the inventory adjustment log, for all count corrections made during the day, the case cart accuracy log noting any errors identified and resolved, the consignment inventory visit, record the supply disruption notification, and initial response documentation, and the purchase order and pricing discrepancy notes. This log is the shift's operational record. It is reviewed by the department manager and retained as part of the department's compliance documentation. The department's performance dashboard tracks a set of key performance indicators, KPIs, that reflect the department's effectiveness across its major operational domains. The KPIs include inventory accuracy rate measured monthly through cycle counting, on-time delivery rate for exchange cart replenishment measured as the percentage of cart exchanges completed before the scheduled deadline stat requisition fulfillment time, the average time from submission to delivery. For stat requests case cart accuracy, rate the percentage of case cart items picked correctly purchase order compliance rate, the percentage of purchase orders fulfilled at contracted prices without price deviations, and total inventory value relative to the target inventory investment level. This month's performance dashboard, updated with today's data, shows inventory accuracy at 99.1% against a target of 99%. The scanner battery fault that caused the wound irrigation syringe count discrepancy represents a localized failure in an otherwise strong accuracy performance. On-time cart delivery rate is 97.8% for the current month. 2 cart exchanges were delivered after their scheduled window. 1 due to a delayed cart return from a clinical unit, and 1 due to a receiving bottleneck that briefly tied up the cart stocking area. Both were documented with root causes and corrective actions. Stat requisition fulfillment time is 17 minutes average for the month, against a target of 30 minutes. Today's activated charcoal fulfillment at 11 minutes contributes favorably. Case cart accuracy is 98.7% for the current month, below the 99% target, driven primarily by the electrosurgical pencil location issue you investigated this morning. The meeting with the OR supply coordinator to address the case cart layout is the corrective action in progress. You prepare the shift summary for the incoming evening shift supervisor. The summary covers the same categories as the morning briefing: stockouts and shortages, receiving discrepancies, equipment status, scheduled events for the evening, and any clinical communications that require follow-up. The evening shift will conduct the exchange cart rotation for the overnight delivery, restocking the carts returned today, and preparing them for the overnight distribution runs. The evening shift will also process any late afternoon deliveries from vendors who use afternoon delivery windows, and will handle any urgent requisitions from clinical units during the evening hours, when patient care activity transitions from the daytime pattern to the evening pattern. You note specifically in the summary the IV bag allocation situation and the monitoring protocol that has been implemented, the backorder status of the wound irrigation syringe, and the replenishment order placed today, the scanner battery replacement required for the scanner with the fault flag, and the case cart layout meeting scheduled with the OR coordinator. These are the items that the evening shift needs to be aware of. You write them clearly. Clear handoffs prevent things from falling through the gaps between shifts. Though your shift ends before the overnight exchange cart rotation begins, the rotation is the central operational activity of the materials management department and deserves a full description. The overnight cart rotation is the scheduled distribution of supplies to every nursing unit and clinical department in the hospital, conducted during the lower activity overnight hours to minimize disruption to clinical operations and to ensure that every unit begins the morning with its par level stock fully replenished. The rotation begins at approximately 10 in the evening, after the evening shift has completed the restocking of the exchange carts that were returned during the day. The overnight team consists of 3 distribution technicians and 1 supervisor, a small team managing a facility of 500 beds. This is achievable because the exchange cart system has pre-staged the supplies. The carts are already stocked. The overnight team does not pick individual items. They move pre-built carts. The physical work is significant because the carts are heavy and the hospital is large. But the cognitive complexity of the overnight rotation is lower than the daytime receiving and requisition work because the task is execution of a predetermined plan rather than real-time problem solving. The rotation route is a documented sequence of unit visits, organized to minimize elevator and corridor travel time while respecting clinical activity patterns. Units with the highest overnight patient activity, typically the intensive care units and the emergency department, are visited early in the rotation when the overnight team is fresh, and when those units' supply needs are most predictable. Units with lower overnight activity, such as the outpatient procedure suites, are visited later when a brief delay in supply delivery is less operationally impactful. At each unit, the distribution technician retrieves the unit's depleted cart from the supply room, replaces it with the freshly stocked cart, and transports the depleted cart to the service elevator for return to the materials management department. The depleted cart is assessed as it comes off the floor. The technician notes the remaining quantities of each item, which provides data for par level analysis. An item that is always at full par when the cart is retrieved is an item whose par level may be too high. An item that is always at 0, or that has been supplemented by urgent requisitions during the day, is an item whose par level is too low. These observations are recorded and fed into the quarterly par level review cycle. The rotation is complete by approximately 3 in the morning, at which point the overnight team begins restocking the depleted carts for the following night's rotation and preparing the receiving dock for the morning's first deliveries. By the time you arrive at 6 for the day shift, the cycle that began with your departure at 2:30 has completed a full circuit. Supplies have left the warehouse, traveled to every nursing unit in the hospital, been consumed by patients and staff, been replaced from the pre-stocked carts, and the depleted carts are in the warehouse being restocked for the next cycle. This cycle has been running continuously since the hospital opened. It will continue to run continuously until the hospital closes, which is not planned. There is something worth noting about the scale of this continuous operation. A 500-bed hospital consumes approximately 15,000 to 20,000 supply items per day, ranging from a single adhesive bandage to a complex surgical implant kit. Each of these items began its journey at a manufacturer's facility, traveled through a distribution network, arrived at the hospital's receiving dock, was verified, stored, picked, restocked on a cart, transported to a floor, and placed in a bin from which a clinician retrieved it at the moment it was needed. The chain of events between the manufacturer and the moment the nurse reaches into the supply room and finds the correct glove in the correct size, in the correct place, is a chain that the materials management department maintains, link by link, shift by shift, every day. When the chain works, nobody notices. The gloves are there. The nurse puts them on. She has a patient to attend to. You have completed a day shift in hospital materials management. During this shift, you received a shift briefing covering stockouts, discrepancies, equipment status, scheduled events, and clinical communications. You processed the morning exception report, approving 32 routine replenishment orders and flagging 15 for review. You opened the receiving dock and processed 14 pallets from the primary medical surgical distributor, identifying 2 damaged cases, resolving a quantity discrepancy, and prioritizing the emergency nasogastric tube delivery. You processed the linen delivery at the secondary dock and organized the linen staging area. You oversaw the restocking of exchange carts by 3 technicians and confirmed the completion of the oncology unit cart. You conducted and resolved the orthopedic implant consignment inventory count, identifying and correcting a charge entry error for a femoral stem implant. You fulfilled 23 requisitions, including a stat request for activated charcoal at 11 minutes. You investigated and resolved a case cart location issue with the electrosurgical pencils. You revised the par level for a suture product. You conducted cycle counting for 140 item locations, finding 3 discrepancies and investigating all 3 root causes. You submitted a value analysis request for an off-formulary electrode gel. You resolved a product substitution for sterile surgical gowns, addressed a pricing discrepancy on isolation gowns, and placed an emergency order for balloon catheters from an alternative source. You assessed the IV bag allocation notification, coordinated a conservation response with pharmacy and nursing leadership, and documented the disruption management plan. You updated the performance dashboard and completed the shift documentation. You prepared the handoff summary for the evening shift. None of the patients in this hospital today knew that any of this happened. A patient who needed a nasogastric tube this morning received one, because the overnight team identified the stockout and placed an emergency order, and because you processed the delivery and notified the unit at 7:45. A patient whose surgeon needed a balloon catheter tomorrow morning will have it, because the cath lab director knew to call materials management before the day was over, and because there was a regional supplier who could deliver it today. A patient in the oncology unit received their chemotherapy because the specialized protective supplies for handling cytotoxic agents were on the correct cart in the correct quantities when the nurses needed them. The supply chain of a hospital is not a glamorous system. It is not a system that generates recognition from the patients it serves, or frequently from the clinical staff whose work it enables. It is a system that generates recognition primarily when it fails, which is the common experience of infrastructure: invisible in success, conspicuous in failure. The people who run it understand this and have made a professional peace with it, in the same way that the professionals in every other script in this series have made a professional peace with the invisibility of their work. The work matters precisely because it can be done so well that it becomes invisible. You do it well. You come back tomorrow. The evening shift has begun the exchange cart rotation. The first carts are on their way to the intensive care units. Everything on them is what it should be. This is correct. Good night.